want you to notice that if they don't come out of Babylon, the wrath of God will fall upon them without mixture of mercy. So this is a message which is extremely urgent, because whoever does not respond to this call and come out of Babylon will not only be lost, but will suffer the terrible outpouring of the wrath of God. In fact, that's what we notice in verse 5. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. So she's going to drink the cup of the wine of the wrath of God without mixture of mercy. In other words, double strength according to this. And then, when this message is finished, the whole human race will be divided into two distinct groups. One group will have the seal of God, and the other group will have the mark of the beast. And this is where we have the scene of Revelation chapter 14 and beginning with verse 14, where Jesus is seated on a cloud and he has a sickle in his hand, and he's going to reap the harvest of the earth, which represent the righteous. He's going to reap them, and he's going to take them into the city of Jerusalem, spiritually speaking Jerusalem, as we've already studied. In other words, they will be members of God's remnant church. But then, the Bible tells us that there's another harvest, the harvest of the grapes, which represent the wicked. They also will be harvested. In other words, you will have two groups, those who have the seal of God and those who have the mark of the beast. Those who have the seal of God will be gathered within the spiritual city of Jerusalem, within the remnant all over the world. And they will be shielded from the wrath of man, and they will be shielded from the wrath of God. But those who are spoken about as grapes will suffer the terrible outpouring of the wrath of God without mixture of mercy. Now, Revelation chapter 14 and verses 14 to 17 speaks about these two harvests, the righteous and the wicked. And then in verses 18 through 20, we have the grapes representing the wicked gathered around Jerusalem. This is not talking about literal Jerusalem in the Middle East, according to what we've studied. Being in Jerusalem is a spiritual state. It means that God's people are with the Lord. They have the seal of God. They keep God's Sabbath. They worship the Creator. In other words, they're on God's side. And even though they're all over the earth, they're spoken of as being in the city of Jerusalem. Whereas all of the wicked are gathered outside the city of Jerusalem. In other words, they've surrounded God's people all over the earth. Now the question is, why have they surrounded God's people? Have they surrounded God's people on friendly terms or on unfriendly terms? When we go back to the book of Joel, which we've studied, we notice that the nations gathered in the valley of Jehoshaphat to attempt to attack and destroy God's people. And so after humanity has been divided into these two groups, God's faithful people will be in this world during the outpouring of God's wrath, and the wicked will surround them with the intention of destroying them. But God will place upon them His protecting hand. In other words, they will not suffer the wrath of God, and they will not suffer the wrath of man. They will be protected in the midst of this terrible time in human history. Folks, the most fertile imagination cannot grasp what this time is going to be like.